Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the bin that we're going to be checking in on today is sort of in an undercover mode. So if you look over my left shoulder here, up on the shelf, there is a bin, one that sort of looks like it's incognito mode since there's no label on it to tell you anything about it. It's just a regular old bin, but it clearly has something in it. So what's in there is something that's been in there now for 10 days. It's the contents of the outdoor worm bag version 4.0. It's just funny how this population of worms has really just been reduced sort of to not a bag, not outdoors, not an overwintering project anymore. So, I mean, the version 4.0 is the only thing that sticks anymore. It's basically worms that were living in the outdoor worm bag until we sort of chickened out and canceled the overwinter project, bought them inside, and since then, 10 days ago, we put them in this tub to try to see if we can convince them to exit their finished castings. To a large degree, we already separated them from their castings using the screen. And it was 10 days ago that we thought to ourselves, let's come back in 10 days, because in 10 days it will be 1 year since that system was originally put into service. So the idea here was to eventually get them moved out into a new system, another unlabeled system over here, which has only been sitting around for a few days. I thought it would be kind of nice to let this sort of sit and prime and become a little bit more cozy rather than just being a big box of sterile bedding for them. For that reason, we're going to just stick to keeping them sort of in this almost, I don't know, started out as horizontal migration, try to get them to come over to one edge of the bin, but maybe if we keep it this way, maybe it'll be more of like a continuous flow setup, sort of like what's been running down in the tray on the bottom, the Taco Bell bin with the mixed red worms. Over the springtails and that are keeping me from wanting to harvest anything, even though it's continuous flow. For the most part, it seems like finished castings could get scooped out of there at some point soon. Haven't done so yet. Might actually beat that bin to the punch doing it that way at some point soon out of here. So let's get this system up on the bench, see how things are looking in there. Let's get to work. The stuff that we used 10 days ago to set up this horizontal migration feeding zone edge of the bin was somewhat similar to what we're giving them today. Today they're going to get pumpkin, and pumpkin was part of what we used last time. Last time it was pumpkin and potato peels. This time, in addition to the pumpkin, there's a banana peel here, and just a variety of different types of veggies used in a soup recently. From celery to parsnips to, who knows, pieces of cauliflower, peels of carrot, all kinds of good stuff in there, and plenty of it. And as you saw, we were also doing a good job, I think, using these plastic pieces to help the system hang on to its moisture content. In fact, here you can even see where some of the moisture has even collected on the paper. Here, not so much so, possibly because of that gap that was in between the two pieces that were over here. I think we sort of did deliberately leave that gap to enable this side to get a little bit more airflow. I'm not sure if the discoloration here shows either, where the plastic covering provided a spot for moisture to recirculate and keep things damp over here, whereas the stuff that was covered with no plastic, only paper, it's a little bit drier here, but certainly not bad. It's kind of nice to see this. I think it's, what's the name for it? To me, it's like mold or fungal growth, basically, mycelium, I guess, collecting here nicely, finding the cardboard to be a nice home. So when I mentioned continuous flow earlier, I think, or maybe I just referenced the concept of sun being continuous. I might not have used even the word flow. The whole idea was that when you set up a system this way, similar to what you're doing when you're trying to just migrate worms out of the material, setting up one side of the bin intended to be really cozy for the worms to be in, so that they leave the other side, which is where their finished castings are that you'd like to harvest. And by getting the worms to evacuate it, you're doing yourself a favor. It's at that point you could simply reach in and start pulling the material out. And I am starting to get the sense that that would be very, very doable here. We gave ourselves a huge leap forward to a state in which this material is free of worms last time by taking all the stuff that these worms were inhabiting from their old container. Like I mentioned earlier, that was the fabric grow bag. And one handful at a time, running all of this stuff through a screen, so that the only stuff that's on this side is material that was small enough to pass through the screen, everything getting caught in the screen, retained and used to assemble this opposite edge of the bin, where all of the large chunk materials the screen caught, in addition to some fresh bedding that we threw in here, all the shredded paper cardboard mix. We definitely set up a nice, comfortable environment for the worms to remain in. And to a large degree, it seems like a large number of the worms that were still stragglers remaining over in the finished castings have already kind of caught on to how nice and cozy the other side of the cardboard is with all that fresh bedding and moisture. I mean, we did protect moisture to a large degree on this side too with the plastic coverings. But I'm almost wondering how we would do if we were to just let this go one more round with no plastic at all covering this side. Stuff would just continue to dry out a little bit more, as it has over the past 10 days. And as a result, probably become almost entirely depopulated of worms. I mean, for that matter, that whole first couple minutes of us just exploring that first further edge, I saw not a worm. It was only when we really got closer to this cardboard divider, suggesting to me at least that the worms that we're seeing here are worms that were in general within the screened material, all gradually on their own, realizing that it's much better to be, in material that's closer to this side versus being, remaining in the old stuff on the opposite side. So I really do get the sense that if we were to just consider this as a horizontal migration, that it's really working well. And, well, wouldn't want to try to give it a gold star above all other horizontal migrations, since there was sort of that little trick in the beginning where we gave this system a far greater advantage at being successful at having all the worms migrate over. We pretty much migrated them ourselves using the screen. And, all the worms that just got caught up in the stuff that got caught in the screen ended up on that side as a result. And it seems kind of unlikely that many or any of them would have just gone through the cardboard divider and made their way back over onto this side, considering that all of the, stuff here is heavily filled with leftover familiar bedding materials that they inhabited all these months over in the bag. And the moisture level, I believe, would probably hold up in this stuff better. I'm not seeing a whole lot of worms. Maybe the worms that, maybe the worms that are over on this side are actually realizing that the best place to be is within the fresh, new bedding. And that's also where we had placed some yummy vegetables for them too, over on this side. So yeah, once you start peeking on the very, very far edge, which is where we added the food last time, that's where all the worms are gathered together. To me it just seemed like at this point, if all this stuff is going to do over here is continue to dry out, and maybe we'll even leave the plastics covering this thing a little bit even more loosely this time than we did last time, permitting even more airflow, permitting even more drying of this material, although further drying of this wouldn't even really be necessary if you ask me. But I definitely like the idea of expanding their space over on this edge, if possible. I guess the only reason I'm being careful is that I thought it would be kind of cool to keep this cardboard in service, to keep the finished castings free of debris, but at the same time moving it over just a little bit to permit us to expand. And I think we just did exactly that, and it seemed to go pretty smoothly. At this point we can even backfill and reclaim some of the space over on this side so that we're not bulging above the rim of the container. That always makes me just a little bit nervous. I kind of like the idea of there being still just a little bit of the rim around here being the highest point, none of the material within the container being above that, if possible. I think we've achieved just that. So once we put our paper and plastic coverings back on, they'll be the highest thing in this container, nothing trying to breach the top surface. So yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of the worms continuing to dig into all this uncomposted material that came through the screen. But if they'd prefer to be in the nice fresh bedding where the fresh food had been applied, I can't blame them, that's for sure. I'm sure you would probably agree with that, you know. Can't blame them for doing what's most appealing and most comfortable and everything else. So I've got my prepared bedding. I'm going to come in here with even more. We're going to build this out for them nicely and start treating this like it might be actually a continuous flow setup. Although at some point soon it does seem to me like getting this stuff out of here is going to be quite easy, and at some point soon I'm also guessing that it's going to be pretty much free of worms, almost certain of it by the next time we come in here. So I mean, I'm starting to wonder if we should start coming up with a guesstimate for how many worms occupy this thing, because if we do set this up as a continuous flow, I suppose there's that possibility that they're not even going to need to get moved into a new environment. I don't know, we'll have to see. Alright, let's let these little guys settle a little bit and then I can rebuild their feeding zone. Alright, I did spot one worm over here who kind of missed out on getting hauled over, getting the express bus over to the new side. So yeah, you know, I bet you this stuff is going to be almost all ready to get scooped right out of here next time. Probably ready even from that perspective to be put right into service, considering it's already been screened one time. At this point, since even in the previous check-ins and now too, I'm really seeing no cocoons. So that was just one observation from the last check-in, was how this stuff appeared to have virtually no cocoons, kind of giving me the sense that, you know, probably wouldn't even be worthwhile to try to prolong the harvest of these castings to try to permit any possible cocoons in this stuff to hatch and for the babies to emerge and get rounded up. It seems in this case that there's not too many cocoons in that stuff. Perhaps they were sensing that they were already at capacity in their previous home and didn't sense the need to expand their population size any further. It's just an interesting thought. Worms do regulate their population size and manipulate their breeding to adapt to the conditions of the environment they inhabit. So sometimes I wonder if some of the things that I'm observing are related to that. So let's drop in a handful of this nice prepared bedding that we've got here for these little guys. That'll be a nice foundation on which we can position this delicious meal we've got for them. This has got a good amount of weight to it, you know. I guess my original thinking, and I guess I could still do that, would be to save a little bit of this stuff to drop into the new bin that they might be moved over into. I built that bin a few days ago, but I did not include sort of a pre-feeding, which is something I do occasionally. You know, but I'm also, just based on the number of worms I'm seeing in here, wondering if it would be beneficial to just give them everything that's here. And if that new bin just sits around waiting for occupants, then, you know, that's fine. It's not losing anything by not getting any food. It was just a little idea that I had, but I am starting to think that perhaps we'd be better off letting these little guys here get all this stuff. A lot of this, like this pumpkin I just dropped in, is just mostly moisture content anyway. As far as actual food goes, I would think that a lot of this leafy material or root vegetables in this assortment here, as well as this banana peel, that's a little bit more substantial stuff they can really work on for a while, rather than it just dumping its moisture content out and leaving little actual food material. Or at least that's kind of the way I view pumpkin. Maybe I'm wrong. And I've also got my, oops, let's try not to get this thing dirty. Keep my glove hand separate for when we apply this pulverized eggshell as grit onto the food that we're giving them. And you know, I've also got some coffee here. Let's pull out all the stops and give them all the makings of a typical worm bin feeding. You know, decisions. If I were to like start running more and more bins in this fashion, kind of looking almost like a continuous configuration, if I were to actually just begin scooping castings out, making more room, expanding their population, I would never have to even move them from one container to another. And if that were the case, then the system would need some sort of a label. What would it be? Would it just, you know, inherit the start date from when it was still in the bag and it would just be continuing? Or when would you kind of consider it as having its birthday? Maybe it would be the day that they got entered into this material, and that the configuration itself at that point sort of transformed from everyday composting to something more of a continuous setup. Decisions. If that were the case, I would need to adapt to that using my spreadsheet to possibly create a new category. Alright, so now here's our opportunity. Oops, let's get the dirty side back down. Here's our opportunity, I believe, to further drive what's already working quite nicely here, which is the ongoing exit of the last few worms still hanging out in this stuff. So sticking to the thorough coverage over the feeding zone is definitely a given, I believe. This side, however, kind of makes me wonder. Does it have to go bone dry, or do we want to at least protect some of it, perhaps out on this far end, to retain some of its moisture, but it's already so dry that I would assume any worms still in it are probably on the move already, looking for something a little bit better. Don't forget, just this aeration that I did just now, and blending in of the dry in with the rest of the stuff is also going to contribute greatly to the drying of the material in general. Yeah, you know, I got a feeling this stuff's going to be almost entirely evacuated next time we check in on it. And then this piece might not even be needed. We'll just leave it here with the rest of the stuff, since it kind of belongs here, and we'll leave it at that. Alright everyone, that's it now for our now 1-year-old version 4 system, whatever you want to call it at this point. I don't even know. Maybe it has sort of transformed into its new existence down here in the wormery officially, now that it's out of the container that it used to live in when it was still outside, and maybe it's just got to get rebranded or something like that. I don't know. I'll be thinking about that. Whether we haul out, relocate, stick to continuous flow configuration, we'll have to see. Alright everyone, that's it for today's check-in with these, you know, now indoor worms, used to be outdoor worms, in a plastic tub, used to be in a bag, used to be over winter, came inside. Totally transforming population, wearing many hats over its lifetime. Alright everyone, very interesting check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Bye now.